What 80s movie still holds up today? David Cronenberg's The Fly, a remake of a silly 1950s B-movie, becomes a creepy prescient analogy about the, still new at the time, AIDS crisis and terminal illness in general. The real horror in this movie is watching the protagonist deteriorate from a quirky Jeff Goldblum character into a horrifying abomination. As he metamorphoses, Goldblum turns into something completely alien, both physically and mentally. A lot of movies use gore for its shock value, but watching Goldblum's low off body parts like a late-stage cancer patient is a different kind of discomfort. I'd say Predator is an underrated film. I mean, it's well known and has a fan base, but as a movie, it's very clever. It actually deviates from the usual formula of writing a script, as the story starts with a different tone and goal for the main character. It takes its time to shift the focus to the predator, and yet, it's a very compact film, with no filler. Looking at You, Lawrence Fishburne's character in The Predator's excellent script, well shot and edited. Watching this again recently and was struck by the fact that Jones really is an everyday guy. He had no strength beyond his body weight and no smarts beyond being a well-researched professor with a literate mind. Yes, that is a little more than average, but shrug. Like he stumbles on puzzles and has to take some time, and once some enemy comes at him with power, you can feel his helplessness. Like he only won one fight because of a propeller. I don't know, there was just a neat simplicity to that. Wouldn't have thought of these movies first, but you've got a great point. One of my favorite bits of subtle acting is done by Lance Henriksen in Aliens when Bishop is examining the facehugger. He's looking at it through a microscope and Spunkmeyer calls out to him, but Bishop doesn't respond. Spunkmeyer does is again, and Bishop looks up with this weird 1,000-year stare of a blank look that lasts for a second before his face relaxes and he turns to respond. He's an android. His processor had to switch over from examination mode to deal with humans mode. My son and I cannot wait for Afterlife to be released in November. D. Ghostbusters has always been one of his favorite movies, and years ago, when he was like IDK. We took him to a local theater showing it for the 30th anniversary. D. Thankfully the theater was mostly empty, because my son, who is autistic and goes through bouts of echolalia from time to time, was reciting the dialogue right along with the actors. It's a even better movie when I watched it as an adult. Jack Burton is so egotistical that he doesn't even realize that his friend is the hero of the movie. It's like a movie from the sidekick's perspective. I didn't realize this as a kid, but it makes it a better movie because it totally fits Jack's character. I do have a test today. That wasn't bullshit. It's on European socialism. I mean, really, what's the point? I'm not European. I don't plan on being European. So who gives a crap if they're socialist? They could be fascist anarchists. It wouldn't change the fact that I don't own a car. Not that I condone fascism, or any ism for that matter. Isms in my opinion are not good. One should not believe in an ism. One should believe in themselves. I quote John Lennon, "I do not believe in the Beatles. I simply believe in me." Good point there. After all, he was the walrus. I could be the walrus. I'd still have to bum rides off of people. Picking a year at random from that decade, 1980, here are the movies I saw back then, which I think are still worth watching as either great, good, or containing some exceptional elements: The Shining, The Elephant Man, Raging Bull, Being There, The Stunt Man, The Idolmaker, My Brilliant Career, The Empire Strikes Back, Moscow Does Not Believe in Tears, Used Cars, Where the Buffalo Roam, Tess, Atlantic City, Berlin, Alexanderplatz, The Big Red One, Airplane, Stardust Memories, Stalker, The Long Good Friday, Tom Horn, The Long Riders, My Bodyguard, The Changeling, The Dogs of War, Dressed to Kill, Altered States, American Gigolo, Bad Timing, Melvin and Howard, The Ninth Configuration, The Blues Brothers, Breaker Morant, Bronco Billy, Caddyshack, Cage Mushla, Popeye, Out of the Blue, Gloria, The Gods Must Be Crazy, Heaven's Gate, The Lathe of Heaven, Ordinary People, Coal Miner's Daughter, and the self-aware B-movie Saturn III. Looking back, it was a fantastic year at the cinema. Rambo: First Blood. The themes of a war veteran with PTSD who feels forgotten and alone, abandoned by his country after serving it, a man harassed and abused by police for doing nothing, being, literally, hunted and persecuted for no reason, and delving into the mindset of a soldier who was just following orders in a war he didn't even want to be in, who returned home to civilians hating him for it. These are all themes that remain relevant through the decades, unfortunately, and Stallone is very good in it. First Blood definitely holds up. Desperately Seeking Susan, less frequently mentioned but a classic of comedic storytelling and urban adventure. 80s NYC and its new wave scene, to include Madonna, add to its charms. While not at the same level of either, its tone reminds me of a cross of Ghostbusters and Clueless. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? I showed it to a friend of mine who had never seen it last week, and he was impressed by the animation blending in seamlessly with the real world. It's crazy to believe that they built robots to act as the cartoons would, but that level of attention and skill really allows you to suspend your disbelief. Gods Must Be Crazy, timeless and still make me laugh. There were 3 movies made in the series. The first 2 are more popular and were made in 1980 and 1989, so just about meet the 80s criteria. Smile. The third was made in 1991 and involved a Chinese zombie, and I found it funny as well, albeit not as much as the first 2. Predator, Aliens, Blade Runner, Full Metal Jacket, Ghostbusters, Mad Max, Beyond Thunderdome, The Breakfast Club, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Trading Places, Amadeus, Return of the Jedi, Terminator, Platoon, RoboCop, The Untouchables, With Nail and Die, Gremlins, Batman, The Naked Gun, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Back to the Future, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Rocky IV, Glory, Spinal Tap, Wrath of Khan, American Werewolf in London, The Princess Bride, Big, Planes, Trains and Automobiles, War Games. Oliver and Company, Why Should I Worry is so freaking. Yes, just yes. Fox and the Hound, animation is so beautiful, touching story, makes me cry every single time. Ghostbusters, peak comedy, I just love it. Beetlejuice, it gets funnier every single time I watch it. Nightmare on Elm Street, the bathtub scene is top-notch and horror. Let's not forget to mention the legendary and beautiful Lin Shaye. Return of the Living Dead, Tarman has always freaked me out. He still makes a big impact on zombie media. Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake, anyone? And that music, the theme alone, when it starts, you know crap is going down. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, they all do. We shouldn't judge works of art by today's standards of morality. We can view movies, etc. of the past, understanding it was a different time. That doesn't mean we will find the same parts funny, just that a movie can still be enjoyed as a period piece. For me, the pinnacle of still being epic long after its premiere, Die Hard. It's just such a winning classic. Nothing says Christmas to me more than watching it leading up to the 25th or even at the stroke of midnight. I hated A Good Day to Die Hard though. It got too big budgeted for its britches at that point in 2013. I watched Big for the first time ever about a month ago. I thought it was gonna be shit. I mean, what do you expect when someone tells you kid gets made into an adult because he wishes he was big? The first thing that came to mind was fuck that. I don't want to watch that. Nope. It was amazing. It's one of my favorite movies. It made me cry. Didn't even feel like it came out in 1988. War of the Roses. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and do so. It's fucking hilarious, and Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner are fantastic at showing the decline of a marriage over many years. It's dark, but the script is perfect in every way. A Nightmare on Elm Street. Only the first one. It's just solid all around by 1984 standards. Tight script, compelling aesthetic, and surprisingly sexy. Not every scene retains its scares, particularly towards its conclusion where special effects are leaned on more heavily. But most of the movie has aged well enough that it keeps a gripping, unsettling atmosphere throughout. An easy entry into my top 5 horror list, both for its influence, and the fact it's still so watchable today. RoboCop, its depiction of corporate greed and militarization of the police is still poignant today. Also, the action is fantastic. Detroit is a bit unrealistic though. It's much nicer in RoboCop than in real life. I've never been to Detroit, I'm just taking a cheap shot at it for the sake of a joke. Gymkata, it's still as bad now as it was in the 80s, only now we've had 20 years in Afghanistan to watch every single movie on the midnight shift and definitively say, this is so ridiculous, and you should wear underwear and your snuggie. Stand By Me, some of that may never have happened with modern cell phones, but they'd be out of range for most of it anyways, so most holds up. Mostly it's about growing up and the loss of innocence, which is a pretty universal theme. Die Hard and Top Gun both stand out exceptionally to me. The former is an iconic action movie that, rightly, propelled Bruce Willis into the mainstream, and the latter was excellent in its commitment to filming with real planes rather than special effects. I'm extremely keen to see Top Gun Maverick, considering what they've said about the similar way they're filming it again, this time with better cameras. Out of Africa, I know it's not one of your showy action flicks or cult classics, but I just watched it first time last week, and it is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen, and the storyline is well paced. The relationships aren't rushed. It was a pleasure to watch. They Live 1988 starring Rowdy Roddy Piper. Favorite line ... Rowdy says I'm here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and it looks like I'm out of gum. Death Race 2000. Just find a copy and watch it. The Cannonball Run, a race from the East Coast to the West Coast. All-star cast. I think movies were just generally better in the 80s. It's hard to go wrong. The acting could be better, but they tend to have better plots. Nowadays, it's just a case of how many explosions and CGI can we fit into one movie. Rewatched Predator the other day. Still a great movie. I'd argue it's low-key a masterpiece thanks to the clever subversion of the 80s action hero trope and defective cinematography. Also, people don't give Arnold enough credit. He can really act, and act pretty damn good too. Dutch is one of his best acted roles for me. Back to School for the greatest dive ever, and still amazes me how agile and light-footed Rodney was. He never got any respect for his athletic abilities or what made him famous, and no one has been able to duplicate him sitting on a hamburger and eating the slice of cheese off of it with no hands. The great Randy gave up after 1,000 failed attempts, and Penn Jillette still attempts it every year for his birthday. Let It Ride, 1989. Richard Dreyfuss, Robbie Coltrane, Terry Gere and Jennifer Tilly, plus lead singer of the New York Dolls David Johansen. Great cast, great script, but totally underrated on IMDb at 6.8. If you like A Day at the Races, you will rate it at least an 8. Die Hard. I try to watch it every Christmas. So many little details follow through to later scenes. The first thing the hero does is run away and try to call the cops. The hero gradually gets dirtier, worn out and injured as the film goes on. It plays out as two highly competent adversaries trying to outsmart each other. I wish they still made action films like they did in the 80s. I'm tired of everything having to be super gritty, shaky cameras, gay everything. Give me a muscle-bound man with the speech impediment dual-wielding machine guns any day. When Harry Met Sally. The film really benefits from having a pragmatic view on adult relationships, without the weird sexist male gaze stuff that you see in films of that time, and arguably Richard Curtis films in the 90s too. Besides the odd thing like a literal Rolodex used by Carrie Fisher's character, it remains very relatable and enjoyable to watch today. Terminator, Predator, Commando, Aliens, Lethal Weapon, Bloodsport, Kickboxer, Rocky 2/3, Goonies, Gremlins, Indiana Jones, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Willow, Labyrinth, Little Shop of Horrors, Ghostbusters and Batman. Off the top of my head, if I had more time to think about it, I could probably come up with more. RoboCop is an exceptional film for many reasons. Aside from its biting social commentary and lampooning of corporate culture, it's also a super economical and lean film. Every scene advances the plot forward. There's zero filler. It's also super clever in its use of visual language and filmmaking devices to show change of time, temporal memory as well as transhumanist philosophies. I was gonna say Big Trouble in Little China because it's my favorite movie ever made, but someone beat me to it. So instead I'll go with one no one has heard of, True Stories. It's a really subtle absurdist mockumentary made by Dave Byrne, the frontman for the Talking Heads. The whole movie is about how every insular community has its own version of normal that seems weird as fuck to an outsider, but is perfectly normal to the community. Well, it's about a million other bits of social commentary too, most of which still hold up really well today, but that's the main one. Aliens, feeling powerless while stuck between a soulless corporate oligarchy with no regard for human life, and the relentless force of nature with no regard for anything at all. All the while, the edgelords beat their chests and insist they can take down the threat in spite of having no clue what they're up against. I relate to that so much nowadays. Ordinary People with Donald Sutherland. I'm specializing in child and adolescent mental health, and that movie hits hard in the way that it portrays PTSD. Don't like the psychiatrist character. He's kind of a shitty therapist and a caricature of the profession, but altogether a very poignant story, without a happy ending which I'm glad they went through with. The Ice Pirates. It has no right being good, and it isn't. It's downright awful. But by God does that ending sequence make it all worth it to sit through a B-movie level parody of Star Wars. The utter ridiculousness of the ending's concept is great, and what a fantastic execution it is. I have never seen any other movie use this concept, and describing it will ruin it. Just watch it. Trust me. You'll hate me for about 80 minutes, but then you'll thank me for the remaining 10. Back to the Future Part 1. Not Part 2. Which most people say is the best. The fact that they depicted the year 2015 as futuristic and ahead of the time just makes it outdated. And it's just the first movie but with a different motivation. The first one is just an absolute classic. Star Wars Episode V, The Empire Strikes Back, and Episode V, Return of the Jedi. Do I need to say more? Ran by Akira Kurosawa. Awesome use of color and just an impressive film all around. The amount of things happening on screen at one time is amazing, and the colors are great in it, so it's worth a watch. Pretty slow though, but I don't mind slow. War Games. It has the most accurate depiction of computer hacking than any movie or show that I've ever seen. Also, the opening scene is very remarkable. To add, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, Castle in the Sky, Graveyard of the Fireflies, My Neighbor Totoro, and Kiki's Delivery Service. Picking a year at random from that decade, 1980, here are the movies I saw back then, which I think are still worth watching as either great, good, or containing some exceptional elements: The Shining, The Elephant Man, Raging Bull, Being There, The Stunt Man, The Idolmaker, My Brilliant Career, The Empire Strikes Back, Moscow Does Not Believe in Tears, Used Cars, Where the Buffalo Roam, Tess, Atlantic City, Berlin, Alexanderplatz, The Big Red One, Airplane, Stardust Memories, Stalker, The Long Good Friday, Tom Horn, The Long Riders, My Bodyguard, The Changeling, The Dogs of War, Dressed to Kill, Altered States, American Gigolo, Bad Timing, Melvin and Howard, The Ninth Configuration, The Blues Brothers, Breaker Morant, Bronco Billy, Caddyshack, Cage Mushla, Popeye, Out of the Blue, Gloria, The Gods Must Be Crazy, Heaven's Gate, The Lathe of Heaven, Ordinary People, Coal Miner's Daughter, and the self-aware B-movie Saturn III. Looking back, it was a fantastic year at the cinema.